ना तेरा खुदा कोई और है, ना मेरा खुदा कोई और है, ना तेरा खुदा कोई और है, ना मेरा खुदा कोई और है। ये जो रास्ते हैं जुदा जुदा, ये मामला कोई और है।
औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम, बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम, अल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन, वस्सलातु वस्सलामु खातमुन नबiyyin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Building Bridges Between the Faiths. We are carrying on with this series on Islam as a solution to the problems plaguing humanity. And because our problems are so much, these episodes are going to be so much because we have to address those problems. And at the end of the day, I think what is the purpose of of our religion, of our beliefs and our existence, if we are not geared towards a peaceful coexistence, and if we are not doing what we have to do to bring about peace and harmony in our environment? Is our life just about getting up in the morning and going to work, in the traffic, and come home and flop in front of the TV and go back next day to work? Is this what life is all about? Or is there a greater purpose to life? So I think, these are the issues that we're going to be tackling. And we are, last episode we were talking about some of the causes that led us to the present situation. Remember, we welcome your views and comments. And in the last segment, we will air them, your views, your comments, and your questions. And you will have the opportunity with our details to keep into contact with us and to communicate with us. Well, we always say our approach has always been, and this is the fundamental principle of Islam as well, in terms of global issues and in terms of us living in harmony with others, that humanity is one family. So based on this, we're going to carry on this discussion where we're saying that Islam offers valuable solutions for today's problems. We did cover, two of the six. In the last episode, we got 6 causes for our present crisis. And we spoke about the reversal of values. And we just started on this issue of rejecting the form of religion rather than religion per se, which led to secularism. And we were talking there when we ended up last episode, in that Europe, went up. There was a whole French Revolution. There was a whole uprising in Europe by the ordinary people called, the peasants, against the feudal system of the landlords and the church itself, because the church at that time and the landlords were in cahoots and oppressing the peasants and the workers, and they all stood up in revolt because they felt they were they denied their rights. But in that process, there was an aversion, and the Europeans, many of the thinkers and people then equated the church with religion as such, and they say, well, they didn't say we don't want that form of religion or that form or that leader who was in charge at the time of the Christian church, but they just said we don't want religion. And that was the beginning of what we call today the French Revolution, the founding phase of what we call secularism. The world where it's stated now that religion is a private affair, that religion has got nothing more to do with us in our daily life. And remember, we did that slide, we showed it many times. That is what was even there in the time, from immemorial, even before, in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. People just used religion and confined and reduced religion to the narrow confines of dogmas and rituals. And that is how secularism was born. And we find, therefore, that there was a separation from church and state. See, that's where it took place. There's a separation. And the whole concept of that is God is only in the church or in the mosque or in the temple. God is not in the parliament. God is not in the banks and in the marketplace. So this is the other problem. And this secularism is another cause. Secularism is one of the reasons for the collapse of our civilization, of the modern world. And it's not I'm saying this alone. We've hinted to that in previous episodes with slides, but we'll go more into that in later episodes, where we will show you where great scholars and thinkers came and said that this is the big mistake. And Einstein said it very well on this too, that when they put religion and put science in conflict with religion. Here he was not saying politics, but it's true. They made this whole Reformation and this whole French Revolution in Europe actually brought science even in conflict with religion, and not only politics and governments, with the state, with religion. And this is under the name of liberty, freedom. This is what happened. This is the forerunner of what we call democracy in the world. Now, there's nothing wrong, with democracy and values. The problem came, as we said, is as our slide is showing you, that we got something with religion per se, or we got something with the way that the form of that religion and the way it is manifesting itself in a given time, in a given society. So there's a lot of discussion will have to take place around that. And in that discussion, we will be talking about, what's Islam's view on secularism and Islam's view, on these issues. Then a fourth reason that led us to where we are today is what we call blind nationalism and patriotism. This is a very important point. I use the word blind. There's nothing wrong with nationalism, within its limits. There's nothing wrong with patriotism. I'm a patriot, I'm a good South African, and I'm proud to be a patriotic South African. It's a good quality. But when it becomes blind and extreme, nationalism and patriotism, then it becomes harmful and detrimental. As with anything, that's why we say extremism is bad in anything. Not only in religion, there's extremism in nationalism. See, here's an example. But today, when we hear the word extremist, we only hear the word Muslim comes in our mind, Islam. Islamist, extremist, terrorist are the extremists. But you ever thought a secularist could be an extremist? Did you ever sit and think that a nationalist can be an extremist? So you see, this is how our mind is conditioned. So blind nationalism is what is national? Maybe we should define nationalism, maybe for the benefit of some of our viewers. Nationalism means my first allegiance is to the church, to the state, to my country and to my government is my first allegiance. That's nationalism. And with that goes your language and your grouping, it goes with that, my clan. Now, you'll find that although we spoke about the French Revolution, in the 1700s, in the 18th century, you find that Europe, because of this scourge of nationalism, what, may I ask you, led to the Europe's, among themselves, Europeans were fighting one another based on this evil of nationalism. This was the cause. Blind nationalism was what led Europe to fight. Remember, we ended up last week with a slide by the German scholar who was speaking about who started the First World War, who's the cause of the Second World War. And do you know how many people were killed in the First and Second World War? Do you know how many? Now, nobody talks. You know how many people were killed during the Crusade Wars, right? Now, nobody wants to talk about those things. And the Muslims were not involved in any of these things. What was it that led, why was Germany fighting Britain? Germans are Europeans. Hitler. British were Europeans. To top it all, both were Christians. Germany was Christian and Britain was Christian. Christians were fighting Christians, Europeans were fighting Europeans. They went to war with each other based on what then? Their religion was the same, their color was the same. What did they fight? On nationalism. My country, I'm a British, I'm a English. The German, we are Germans, so we are the Germans. You see? So you can see how all these things have been, came to the front to the point that they were killing each other. And this is the scourge of nationalism and patriotism, blind patriotism. I'm not going to say, what there's a nice slogan for this blind patriotism and nationalism. You know what it says? Right or wrong, my country is right. Right or wrong, my leader is right. It doesn't work like that. That's blind patriotism. That's what led people, even now, people in the name of the flag. See, another symbol of a country is the flag. And these are the issues. Your flag is the symbol of your country. So you give your life to your flag and your country. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying it's wrong if it's within the domain and bounds of correct values and correct principles. But it becomes extreme. When you go to the extreme, it becomes evil. And that's what led Europe to fight. You know, so many world wars. Europe was at war with itself because of that. So inshallah, stay tuned. We'll be back after the break to continue this discussion. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, we're talking about, this secularism and how Europe fought each other. Christians, Europeans among themselves fought each other because of this, nationalism, blind nationalism, and blind patriotism. We will actually give the Islamic solution to all. We must understand we are giving the causes of this current crisis, and at the end of it, as we proceed, we're going to take each one of these. And each one of these, we're going to talk about what is the Islamic view. If you take number one, what is the Islamic views of human beings? Are they just material beings? About the values, what does Islam say about because we said there's reversal of values in the world. The form of religion, which is the cause of problem. Blind nationalism and patriotism. What is the Islamic view of, this nationalism and patriotism? And we did give the example of this blind nationalism and patriotism to say people blindly just follow the leaders and the governments. And I'll give you just one incident in the history of Islam, where you'll find that an ordinary citizen stood up, could stand up and challenge the state president, the caliph, in a dignified manner, in a respectable manner, and say, I disagree with you here, and yet he's talking to the state president. So this is the concept that we must not, just take everything that's given in power by people in authority, by people in power. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And we must not allow a wrong to go ahead and accept the wrong. Remember we said that nationalism, this blind nationalism says what? Right or wrong, my country is right. By the way, let's maybe just bring it to the individual level, this nationalism, and tribalism. Let me bring tribalism into it, because it's also an issue. We talk about tribalism. Right or wrong, my tribe is right. I'm from the Zulu tribe. I'm from the Indian tribe. I'm from the Chinese tribe or whatever. And right or wrong, we are right. No, it doesn't work that way. If my fellow Indian brother of Indian origin is wrong, he's wrong. If my fellow Muslim brother, although he's my same religion, if he's wrong, he's wrong. I'm not going to side with him because he's a Muslim. I'm not going to side with him because he's from my tribe or from my clan. It doesn't work like that. The Quran, you see, these are values now. These are the things that led to problem. And as we're speaking, that's what leads to clans. Clans and groups and people, sectarianism, and this conflicts. This is how conflicts begin, and I think we have to come back. That's why we're looking at a very broad level, at a very broad level, the causes of our present crisis. But when we start to unpack each one, we'll have to go into the nuts and bolts. We'll have to go lower down into the actual causes and issues and see how we can unpack them and what is the solution then. And unless and until we do not do this, we'll just be going with the wind and flowing with the flow, as citizens, and we're going to be, rather than being an agent of change, we will be an agent who is flowing with the cause of it. We're just flowing with the tide and not checking whether the tide is taking us in the right place or in the wrong place. And I think this is very critical for us. Now, let's take the fifth cause of our present crisis, what we call camouflage democracy, or bogus democracy, or spaza democracy. Maybe you want to use these words. Now, again, this is a very loaded concept, this. we did a series on Islam and democracy, an episode in the past. And I think this is very critical for us to know that what is this democracy? In the name of democracy, so many wrongs is being done in the world today. With the name democracy, people see the word democracy and feel that democracy is right, and democracy is like a holy cow. It's like a religion now. You can't question it. No, there's nothing against democracy. You see, we're practicing the same principles we are telling others to practice. Don't throw democracy away. Throw the form, the bad form of democracy away. This is the issue. Because there are different forms of democracy. There are different forms of democracy. And when, you know, as I said, there's a whole episode done on this, and we can go in the past episodes. But in a nutshell, you know, just to explain it to you in a nutshell, we got to be careful, because there are many people, many countries right now in the world. They're far from a democracy, but they say we are a democracy. A label does not make a thing what it is. Hear what I said. A label does not make the thing what it is. If I have a glass of water here, or a bottle of water, and I put a label vinegar, it's looking, vinegar is clear, it looks like water, but is it water? The label doesn't make it what it is. We have to test, we have to take that liquid out and taste it and test it and analyze it to see whether it is vinegar, what the label is claiming. You see, and this is another big problem in the world with this thing called democracy. You know, the concept, you see, the word democracy, maybe I should just say something else here that is very relevant to the discussion. Remember, we showed you a slide in the last segment earlier on where we were talking about, you know, Norman Finkelstein, he's talking about how we, the Europeans, they changed concepts, you know. They brainwashed people and labeled people that are not Americans as barbaric and uncivilized because of their dressing. And today, the Western people are dressing the same way, half naked, but they call themselves civilized. You see, double standards, which is the 6 points we're talking about there, you know, on the screen. And this is where the world is lacking. Now, if we come to this camouflage democracy, and what we are trying to say is that in the world today, you find that, you know, people are just putting labels and claiming to be what they want. And in the past, this word democracy itself, we said the roots of it is from the, you know, 18th century. From the 18th century. This word democracy. But always don't look at words and labels. It's another lesson we must learn. Don't go by labels. Go by what it is. Analyze the actual item on its substance, on its merit, and on its value, and on its contents. You know, don't go by labels. Labels are misleading, all right? And you find that, I'll give you two examples to tell you this, just as a concept. We are trying to put as a concept, because in people's mind, it is that the West introduced democracy to the world. See, that's where we're getting at. Many even African people and Asian people and many people of the world are under the false pretense that it's the Europe and the French Revolution that brought democracy, and everybody's talking about democracy as that's the new religion of the world today. Let me remind the people, and we did 2 episodes on this. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he went to Medinatul Munawwara, you know, when he had to leave Mecca, there was persecution. And in the Sirah, he went to Medinatul Munawwara, and he called the people together of Medina, the Jews, the Christians, and he made an agreement called the Shaifat the Dusturul Medina. It was called the first constitution the world ever knew. It's available. It's still available in its written form. And we did a whole series on this, and we did another series where the Prophet ﷺ's agreement with the people of the book, the bishops of Najran, the Christian delegation from Najran. These are 2 very powerful agreements that are reduced to writing. It's there available still 1,400 years ago. That charter of Medina, you call it the Medina Charter. That charter, if you look at the clauses, was the first constitution and the first democratic constitution that the world has ever seen since then. It's 1,400 years, not the French Revolution. The French Revolution came, you know, 13 centuries later, right? It came much, much later. So these are the kind of things. In Africa, let's go to Africa. Let's look at Africa. Long before the colonialists and the Europeans arrived in Africa, Africa was a thriving continent. Africa was a flourishing continent in Africa. Even before Islam came to Africa. You know, Professor Ali Mazrui did, and Allah, grant him Jannatul Firdaus. He's passed away, he's passed on, and may he, get all the benefits of the good work he did. He wrote a book called The Triple Heritage, Africa, a Triple Heritage. He spoke about how in Africa there was 3 heritages, 3 civilizations, if you want to put it that way, 3 ideas, 3 cultural forces. One was the African, the continent of Africa, the African, original, indigenous African, heritage. Then the Christians came. Then there's what we call Christianity, the Christian heritage. And then Islam came last on the African continent. And it's the Islamic heritage. So it's the 3 heritages that came. But you'll find if you read his book and if you look into history, the African people were so well organized. Just that the word was not there. They were very democratic in how they ran their governments and how they ran the cities and the towns and the places. We, in our mind, are only thinking that this democracy only came from after the French Revolution. So that's just as a side point to come and show you that this democracy, we got nothing against it. It was there. It's a good concept. But look at it as the concept, not as the word itself. And as a concept. And democracy is a broad concept. When we discuss it, when we come to the solutions part, if anybody wants to know more detail about that topic of Islam and democracy as a discussion on its own, you can get that episode in the last segment. We will give our details. You can go onto ITV website or you can contact IFRI for that. But coming back to our discussion here, I'm saying camouflage democracy because it's a holy cow. And now the 6th point is the double standards and lack of justice. And this actually is another very, very important cause of our present crisis. It is now a very serious problem. Let's give you one example. Norman Frankenstein gave that snippet that I gave you about the dress and how in Europe, how in America, how the roles and values have changed, right? He gave that example. But I want to give you a few examples of these double standards and lack of justice in the world under the name of governments who've got the label, we are democratic governments, but how they are practicing double standards. Stay tuned. We'll be back after the break.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد.
Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, we are just coming to the tail end of some of the causes of our present crisis that brought us to where we are. And remember, we are talking here at the macro level. We are talking as a country and as a world, right? And this is that the discussion is around that. We're looking at, if we look at ourselves as the world, today we have what we call all the different countries of the world have a forum called the United Nations. It started off, in fact, how did this body come about? This body, the United Nations, the forerunner to it was called the League of Nations. Because after World War II, we spoke about World War I and World War II. In the 1940s, it ended, early 40s, when Europe was basically at fighting with itself. And it obviously absorbed Russia then and China and the whole world was at the moment engrossed in that time in 2 massive, that's why you call it a world war. So as a result of those 2 major conflicts, and let's remind ourselves, Muslims were not the cause or part of that conflict. Just keep that straight. It was, they were not, it was more the Christian world and the European world and the rest of the world that was involved in these 2 world wars. But as a result of those conflicts, there was what they called the League of Nations. A body was formed, which was a good idea. A body was formed, the League of Nations, wherein, all the nations of the world, when the war stopped, they said, look, I think it's nice we have a forum, all the countries, We must rather come and meet. It's called like a round table conference. We must have a place, a forum where we can come and discuss and rather talk about things rather than fight about things. Maybe we can resolve our differences, around a table. And that's where the League of Nations was formed. And then that later on became what we call the United Nations today. And it's known as the United Nations. And this United Nations is the world body where all the countries of the world sit. And it's it has a constitution and it has good in it, right? However, there's two things of the United Nations I want to share. We're talking about double standards and lack of justice in the world. You find that the United Nations has like two sectors. One is the General Assembly of the United. General Assembly is everyone who's is a country that is a properly constituted country in the world becomes a member of the United Nations of the world. See, so they are there. But the United Nations itself, every so many years they elect another speaker or the head of the United Nations, the secretary of the United Nations. It's normal for any body, a forum. We do that for small organizations and church committees and masjid committees and schools. We have the school governing body, which has a committee and have a chairman and secretary. So obviously a world body like this has to be organized. But they also have what we call a Security Council. We have a Security Council of the United Nations. Now this Security Council is the body, not the General Assembly now. It's now, in the past, it was just 5 nations of the world that was members of the Security Council. And this Security Council is the one that decides who goes to war and about the big important issues of global shifts in the world and the real issues and who will fight. And they can send, the United Nations can send somebody to stop a war or they can send somebody to start a war. So it's a very powerful body. And in the past, this was only confined to, Russia, I think China, America, Britain and France, the big 5. They were the only ones could be in there. But you'll find it has expanded a little bit, and right now, as we're speaking, South Africa is trying to lobby and is trying to say we also want to be a member of the Security Council, permanent member. But now let's come to the double standards that we're talking about, the double standards of the National Assembly and the Security Council, or let's call it the United Nations Security Council. The double standards comes where you'll find that in let's take one example, just one or two examples. You'll find there are so many resolutions that were passed, for instance, against the state of Israel to say that it is committing so many human rights atrocities against the Palestinian people. Documented, everything discussed in them, and resolutions even passed and confirmed that these are violations of human rights, taking land, the settlement issue, and that the state of Israel is taking land that's belonging to the Palestinians and what and what and what. And there's so many, hundreds of resolutions passed condemning that. But every time when it comes to the Security Council to take action, America is called a veto power. They call it a veto right. What America does, it says, no, I have the veto power, I don't do anything, just let it go. We're protecting Israel from what the wrongs they are doing. We're using our veto right. But Saddam Hussein in Iraq, once in his whole life, he went into Kuwait. He went into one small area of Kuwait and he said, no, these oil fields were my oil fields from the past. And it was taken wrongfully from me, and he says, I'm going to take it. Just made one move to Kuwait, and the whole United Nations Security Council said, we're sending the whole United Nations army to attack Saddam for doing that. One small, incursion, he didn't use force, he didn't kill nobody, and he felt that was his oil fields. They took the whole world, the allied forces of the security, to attack Saddam Hussein. But they don't attack Israel for what it is doing, showing you the double standards in world events. You'll find today people around the world, actually, even the General Assembly nation states are also saying that, you know what, the United Nations is now no more democratic as it's supposed. There's lack of justice. If she on our screen, the last point there, double standards and lack of justice. So number 5 and 6 go together. There's no more democracy in the Security Council in the United Nations. There's double standards and there's lack of justice. So these are the causes of the present crisis. And I think we got to look at all these causes now, having gone through it. Inshallah, in the next coming episodes, we are going to now take each one and unpack them and then, show how they cause the problems and what are the solutions. What are the possible solutions for these problems? And inshallah, we will go through this in the next 2 or 3 more episodes where we can bring it to finality and show how Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah. Remember, we talk of Islam, it's separate from Muslims. Separate in the sense that Islam takes its rulings and its sources. It's from the Quran, which is the divine book, the last testimony to humanity, and the Prophet, peace be upon him's example, his Sunnah, as the divinely sent messenger who practiced it and showed us how to implement it, and which he did, and he succeeded. He succeeded in bringing about peace in the world. You remember George Bernard Shaw? Maybe, because I want to go into some questions, I want to go a bit earlier because there's a few other questions and issues to discuss because of the many emails and comments we're getting. So we will, George Bernard Shaw, what he said, again, a British playwright and a British scholar and philosopher. Again, although he's a British and a European, you don't paint him with the same brush as all the British. American, Michael H. Hart was an American, but don't paint him with the same brush as all the rest of the Americans. Likewise, not all Israelis are bad, not all Jews are bad, not all Indians and Africans are bad. Don't paint everybody with the same brush. So let's come and see, what did George Bernard Shaw say about this? George Bernard Shaw said, in the light of our discussion, he said that I believe, and he said this long ago, almost, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And he says, I believe that if a man like Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were to become the leader of the world today, the modern world, he will succeed in bringing back the peace and harmony that the world needs. In other words, he's got the solution, and he will not only that he's got the solution in theory, but he will succeed in bringing about the much needed peace and happiness that the world needs. Now here's a very powerful statement from a very thought-provoking and a serious man who gave it a lot of thought, and not only him. Many other scholars have done that, and that is why this episode, this series that we are doing, is about how Islam can be a solution. And the sad part, as we, rounding up this first part of this episode and this segment, is that it is Muslims. Muslims themselves, need to come to the table. Muslims themselves need to wake up, in a sense, and come and see these things. And Muslims themselves, unfortunately, have also fallen into the same quagmire, right, into the same mistake as other religious groups prior to them, and where they have confined the Islam to rituals and, things like that, as if it's not relevant to us. So you don't blame sometimes people to say they are judging Islam by what they see in the Muslims, but they mustn't do that. Yes, we are guilty of that as Muslims, but don't judge a religion by its followers. Judge it by what it is saying. So, having said that, let's just go to some of the, the details. Take out your pens. We'll give you the details again. We will give it before the end of the show again in the next segment. But let's go to our questions there right now. Because you remember the last question, we didn't do justice to it last week about Islam and is terrorism. And so how can Islam be the solution if Islam promotes terrorism? And you remember we discussed that, we mentioned ISIS, because one of the other questions came about is this ISIS and all these groupings and suicide bombings. Now, here's another very interesting one, because that keeps coming up. Now, there's Professor Robert Pape of Columbia University in the USA. If you see that there on that clip, he did a whole survey. He's a professor, by the way. He's an academic. And he carried out a survey on suicide bombings, right? On all suicide bombings. And he says, let me go and do a survey. He's not a Muslim. He's an American. He's a scientist. He's a researcher, so he's doing it objectively. And he says, let's go in to look at this, because every time it's suicide bombing, Islamic suicide bombers, right? All these things. So we need to unpack this, inshallah, and talk about this, because this has taken center stage. And this is, giving this bad, name or a bad image, to Islam and Muslims. So I think we need to unpack this very much, because it's very pertinent to the discussions we are doing. Because the question is, what gives you Muslims and Islam the right to talk about solutions when your suicide bombers are the cause of the problem of the world right now? So stay tuned. We'll be back after the break.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد.
Yes, welcome back. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're discussing the issue of suicide bombing. There's three very interesting outcomes from Professor Robert Pape's research into suicide bombing. And remember, this is an academic study. It's available. His research is available. There's three findings he made out of this. Firstly, we always thinking that the Muslim, are the heading the bombing, and we used to blame the Palestinians and this Muslim jihadist group. He found that the Tamil Tigers were topping the list of suicide bombing. It started from there as well, and they were the ones who were very, very prominent in this suicide bombing operations. And so that's the very first thing we must get to know. Obviously, this research is a few years ago. With what's going on in the Middle East, you are seeing more and more of these suicide bombings taking place, which is be another scenario which I'm going to add to what Robert Pape. I'm just saying there's an important finding of his which I want to mention, which we must take cognizance of. So now the important thing, why we're mentioning this Tamil Tigers, is that according to what we all believe, is that it's religious beliefs, that a religion influences suicide bombing. He says suicide bombing is not influenced by a person's religious beliefs. You know why? If you know anything about the Tamil Tigers, the Tamil Tigers are a Marxist inclined group, secularist Marxist group. They're not believing in religion too much. So what he has found, unlike what the media is trying to put in our heads, that Islam encourages suicide bombing. What a thing to say. Even that Islam is encouraging people to be suicide bombers. Now, he has showed that religion is not involved when the survey that he has done. Even if you take he studied the suicide bombing done by the Palestinians at the time, the groups, some of the Palestinian groups, he found out, which is the third point on the screen if we go to it, that the real causes of suicide bombers are denial of human rights. If you deny people the human rights, that is what drives people to desperation. You remember, a suicide bomb, to do a suicide operation is a sign of a desperation. You have no other option. What he has found, that if in any conflict situation, if the one group, the weaker group, so to say, or the oppressed group, or the group that is, struggling and fighting against the bigger power, if they are denied the human rights, if they are denied a forum whereby they can, vent and give aid to what their views are, then in a desperation, as a last-ditch effort, the suicide bombing, it drives them because of frustration. I mean, they don't just do it as a first resort, because in suicide bombing, you're taking your own life. So nobody will only take let's talk about the word suicide. Let's take the word before we come to the bombing. Leave the bombings and all. Let's talk about suicide. Then you'll understand what Professor Robert Pape is saying. In normal society, every day there are people commit suicide. Normal people working in the towns, in the city, they commit suicide. Why? No, we're not talking about wars now. We're talking about your neighbor or somebody in school, high school children who committed suicide. Why? what drives an individual to commit suicide? When that individual feels that they have problems, the problems are too much for them to bear. See, it drives them to take their own life. When they cannot handle the problem, they don't share it with others, and they don't find an outlet for the pressure. It may be a small problem, but for them it's a big problem. And then it works in their mind, and then they feel there's no need to live anymore, and then they go and take their life. Now, just transfer that whole thing to a conflict situation now. Transfer this, take for instance, in any conflict where the oppressed people, whether it's in Gaza, or whether it is in Libya, or whether it is in Africa, or wherever it may be, that a person is in China or anywhere where people are oppressed, right? And they do not have a means out. Every day their soldiers come and they rape their mothers and their sisters. They come there, they throw bombs on them, and they're doing all these things. So this individual now comes to a point, he's got no guns, there's restrictions, they don't allow any goods to come in, he's landlocked, and he's like a sitting duck now. This person is like a sitting duck waiting for the enemy to come and shoot him, to kill him, or drop a bomb on him. It's wrong for him to go and put a bomb, but it's all right for the enemy, the power that be to put a bomb on them. That's correct. So this drives him. In his mind it works. Like that school child, or like that person going through some emotional crisis, boyfriend, girlfriend problem, whatever it is, and they can't handle it. He can't handle this anymore, all this. So it drives him. He said, you know what? I rather put a bomb around me, and I'm going to go. I got no guns. They don't allow me to have guns. They don't allow us to meet, have meetings. They don't allow us to have a meeting, have a forum to discuss. The world is not worried about us too. The United Nations is not worried about us too. I'm frustrated. He takes this, straps himself, and he goes for a target, and he goes either the one soldier on the opposite side or the military base or what, and he blows himself up because he says, I'd rather not live. Robert Pape is saying this is what drives people to suicide bombing. Now, it's easy for us to sit and judge this thing, but it's nothing to do. Suicide bombers, even the Japanese kamikazes were suicide bombers. So having put this out of the way, suicide bombers are not only Muslims. Now, I want to just shift this discussion very quickly because of time. I want you all to think a few things. And I want you to, I know what I'm saying, but we may not have time to expand it. But let me tell you what's going on right now. You're hearing every day, bomb went out in a mosque, killing so many people in Iraq. But in Pakistan, the bomb went out, killing so many people. Yeah, there. One bomb went off in France. Yeah, killing that suicide bomber. Not every suicide bomber is a suicide bomber. Not every bomb that exploded was a human being. Today we have technology where you can detonate a bomb. I can have a bomb that is remote controlled. So I'll put it in a car, and I'll come far away, and I'll press the button, and the bomb will go off. But the news will say it's a suicide bomb went off. Did you hear what I said? The news will say a suicide bomber did this. Because now he put it in a busy place, so there's bodies lying around there. So you don't know who was the suicide bomber and who was the victim that was nearby there. Now, firstly, let me say something. We condemn absolutely, as an individual, I'm condemning it. The Quran itself condemns this killing of innocent people. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, condemns the killing of innocent people. So we condemn this innocent killing. If you call terrorism as killing innocent people, we condemn it. Whether it's done by anybody, Muslim or who, it's wrong. So let's start with it. We're not condoning it. But I want to put one point to you. I want us to think of something. Ask who is doing this. This is not, point number 2, if I want to, as a suicide bomber, listen to what I'm saying. If I'm a suicide bomber and I'm in Afghanistan, or if I'm in Iraq and I want to do a suicide operation, why will I go to a busy marketplace? And my own citizens, my own people, my mother could be there. My auntie could be in the shopping place. Am I so stupid to go and blow myself up there? I would rather go and look for a military target. I look for where the enemy military base is. Isn't it true? And I'll go and rather take 1 or 2 of them with me. I won't go and do it in a busy marketplace. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. These that you are seeing in a mosque and in this thing, these are remote control bombs that are done by somebody else. Think about it. I'm giving you a second scenario. Number 3, these drones. These drones which America and other forces are using. What is it? It's a remote control. The drone is being remote controlled. And it goes where it wants to go, and it drops the bomb where it wants to drop it. This is proving to you of the technology that we have. And finally, I end up with the suicide bombing with one simple question. With one simple question, we have to think about this. Right? Where are the most suicide bombing now in the Middle East and in Afghanistan? I'm asking you, go and do a research on this. As we're ending this program, go and do a research on what I'm telling you. Go and find out how many suicide bombings there was during the reign of Saddam Hussein before America invaded Iraq. Go back and go and ask Professor Robert Pape. Professor Robert Pape, how many suicide bombs were there in Iraq while Saddam Hussein and before America invaded? You won't even think of one. Professor Robert Pape, how many suicide bombers was in Libya when Gaddafi was ruling? And both of them, I'm not saying they were good leaders. I'm not defending them. We talk about suicide bombing. How many suicide bombings was in Libya before the American instigated invasion and France allied into Libya? You wouldn't think of one. How many suicide bombings was there in Pakistan or in Afghanistan before American invasion of Afghanistan? Now I hope you're understanding what we're saying. How come now the suicide bombings are rising? Why before the coming of America, no Al-Qaeda and no ISIS went and bombed a mosque in the time when those were the dictators there? Why no Al-Qaeda and no ISIS went and put a bomb in a marketplace before the American invasion? So you must sit and think, in everything there is a third force. There is a third force. Remember what I said when we're talking about history and how the media is lying to us? Remember, there's always 3 sides to a story. There's my side, there's your side, and there's the truth, which is the third dimension. So in this suicide bombing is their story, what the media is saying, and it's what others are saying from the opposite side, and the truth is probably lying. Because it's not only the oppressed, it's not only the oppressor, but there's a third force operating that wants to keep the conflict going. Remember, the biggest sale in the world is arms industry. You know arms? The armaments industry is the biggest money spinner in the world. And for that industry to be always thriving, the wars must carry on. There must always be bombs and wars. And then that business, and who's owning that business? It's the same people who are controlling the United Nations. The same people, the America and France and Britain, they are the ones who make these bombs, and they have to make sure the war carries on. Till we meet again, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You could take down our details, inshallah, from the screen and write to us. We would appreciate your comments and keep building the bridges of understanding. We will continue with this series till we meet again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
ना तेरा खुदा कोई और है, ना मेरा खुदा कोई और है. ना तेरा खुदा कोई और है, ना मेरा खुदा कोई और है. ये जो रास्ते हैं जुदा जुदा, ये मामला कोई और है.